Hello, everybody. Okay. So imagine optimizing your life, your health, but doing it only for 2/3 of the time, right? And it's like if you had a large company and you invested everything in the company, but you allowed the bookkeeper to embezzle 1/3 of your funds. That's what happens if you don't pay attention to your sleep. You spend 1/3 of your life sleeping. And if sleep did not serve an absolutely vital function, it would be a colossal waste of time. So I can tell you that, especially in the US, the healthcare system is broken. And from what I've heard, it's kind of broken everywhere too, because typically the way that the healthcare system works is you wait for somebody to get a sleep disorder, or you wait for somebody to be sick before you decide to give treatment, which is why I left traditional medicine and I have this concierge sleep medicine practice, which is precision optimal health. So it's a practice which focuses on personalized, proactive, preventive care, beginning upstream. So before a problem actually happens, you start with a healthy person and you want to keep them healthy. And that's why you focus on sleep. So I'm going to tell you, spend the next few minutes talking about the science of sleep and circadian rhythms and why it's important. And so in the field that I'm in, I'm lucky enough to work with the best, the top athletes. So I work with professional athletes, I've worked with astronauts, worked with Navy SEALs, I've done some work for the Navy, Marine Corps, the US Navy and Marine Corps, and with the US Olympic teams. And I will tell you that astronauts want to be like, they want to be like Navy SEALs, and Navy SEALs want to be like professional athletes. And business leaders want to be like professional athletes because they want to optimize everything. And I'm going to tell you just a little story about my work. These are just the two highlights of work that I've done. You guys might not recognize who these people are, but this is Sean Payton. He is a Super Bowl winning coach. So he works for the National Football League in America. And he's charged with managing a $2.5 billion organization. And the entire, they play football games, but they want to win games, right? So, and he's working, he is, in his late 50s, and what he does is strategy, while the athletes who work for him are younger, and because they're younger, they have to, throw a ball or catch a ball. And similarly, in 2019, I worked for the Washington Nationals. This is the Major League Baseball team. And what he wanted is that, what he wanted is to make sure that his athletes, they slept like astronauts, so they got enough sleep. And it was pretty successful. I'll tell you, I won the World Series. They won the World Series. I got a World Series ring. They went to London to play against the Miami Dolphins, which is another team, and they won. So I'm going to show you, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about the science, why sleep is important. So the first reason why you need enough sleep is that when you get less sleep, you get impaired. And that happens in a dose-dependent fashion, which means that if you're getting 4 hours of sleep regularly, you are slower and you're inaccurate. But 4 hours is worse than 5, is worse than 6, is worse than 7, is worse than 8, right? So the less sleep you get, the worse off you are when it comes to performance, but your ability to tell that you're impaired is also impaired. So it's like being drunk. If you're drinking alcohol, you should be the last person who decides whether you're fit to drive, because you don't have the ability to make that decision. That's what happens when you get less sleep on a chronic basis. And in fact, when you're sleep deprived, there's actually one part of the brain that's preferentially impaired when you get sleep deprived, and that's your prefrontal cortex. And that part of the brain is responsible for good decisions, multitasking, good judgment. And at the same time, there's actually one part of the brain that lights up, which is your emotional brain. So when you're sleep deprived, you make bad decisions. In fact, every function of the brain is optimal when you're well rested. So anything you learn during the day, your brain hits the save button. So any memory you form is consolidated while you're sleeping. And It's not just memory, it's creativity, which is what entrepreneurs do, is taking new information, putting it together with previously stored information. It's a function of a well-rested brain. And things like what is known as soft skills. So emotional intelligence, self-awareness, the ability to make relationships, to have connections not just with your subordinates or your other work members, but even with family members, right? All of that is a function of a well-rested brain. So it becomes really, really important. Now, in fact, so there are studies that show that if you are sleep deprived, on performance tests, it's almost as if you've been drinking alcohol. So if you require about 8 hours of sleep and you get 6 hours, it's equivalent to drinking 2 to 3 beers. So I have a question here for the audience, right? So if you had a very important board meeting or something important to do at 9 o'clock in the morning, how many of you would drink 2 or 3 beers for breakfast and then show up to work? Raise your hands. Well, okay. I have another question. If you have a very important meeting, right, an absolutely essential board meeting or work meeting, how many of you would show up here after getting less than 8 hours of sleep? Raise your hands. We all do that, right? We do that because we think we can get by with less sleep, right? We don't have that ability to tell. The other thing is that think of sleep as a nightly reset button. Every time you fall asleep, and then what it does is it prepares you to face the stresses of the next day. And if you haven't slept very well, you can't cope very well. And if you can't cope very well, you become anxious and you have difficulty sleeping. In fact, this relationship to mental health is well known. It's a bi-directional relationship, which means that poor sleep, so if you sleep poor and irregular sleep, is a risk factor for developing depression and anxiety. And of course, if you have depression and anxiety, people don't sleep very well either, right? So that's another reason why it's very important. So one thing we do know is that while you're sleeping, your brain, your blood rushes through your brain and it power washes it of all the toxins that have accumulated during the day. So this is a vital function of your sleep. And while you're sleeping, all the recovery happens. And in fact, recovery happens at the molecular level. DNA repair happens during your sleep, right? So think of being awake as slow brain damage. All the repair happening while you're asleep. Okay, so with that background, I want to switch gears here and talk a little bit and give you some information about what the science is behind how you get sleepy or alert during the day. So the first thing that happens is that when you wake up, the one process that decides how sleepy or alert you're going to be during the day is something called your wake drive or your sleep drive, right? So when you wake up, say about 7 o'clock in the morning, by the time 11 p.m. rolls around, you have 16 or 17 hours of wakefulness that accumulates. And then when you fall asleep, you consume this, right? This is simple to understand. It's like the longer you've been awake, the longer you've not eaten, the hungrier you're going to be. The longer you're going to be awake, the sleepier you're going to be. So most people have a sleep need. So and for adults, it's between 7 to 9 hours, but it could be different. So for you, it could be 8.2. For somebody else, it could be 7.4. For me, it may be 8.6. And we have to figure, if you want to live optimally, you want to understand exactly what your sleep need is. Now, we do have a voluntary control over sleeping, right? Because if we were in the wild and we did not have this voluntary control, and if you got really sleepy and you had a tiger chasing you and you've decided you had to fall asleep at that time, you'd be killed, right? The problem is that we live in a society right now where we feel like we've constantly being chased by a tiger because the stress is really high, which results in people not sleeping very well. But the second thing, so the first thing, like I said, is your sleep drive, which is the number of hours you've been awake. But the second thing is your circadian clock. So when you wake up in the morning, your brain secretes an alerting signal that opposes this sleep drive, right? There's a slight dip in the mid-afternoon, which is where everybody feels sleepy, which is why like 3:45 in the afternoon is a very bad time to have a sleep talk, because there are people sleeping in the audience. Nothing to do with me, everything to do with your own circadian clocks, right? And then in darkness, melatonin is secreted, which dampens this alerting signal. And this is what keeps you asleep at night. I got to tell you that, so there's a dip in the mid-afternoon, and you want to find out where your dip is, because again, that is where optimal medicine comes into place, because yours is different from the person who's sitting right next to you. But in addition to that, between 3 to 6 in the morning, is also the time when your circadian rhythm is absolutely at its minimum. There was a train crash, I think, in Greece yesterday, right? Human error happened at night, right? And when you find out about it, typically what comes out is that they're sleep deprived, so there's an error in their judgment that results in this. So I want to tell you a little bit about that circadian clock, because understanding your circadian clock really is at the forefront of what's coming next, precision medicine. So because we live on this rotating rock, and because there's alternating cycles of light and dark, we've all developed timekeeping systems in us. And for us human beings, the timekeeping system is in your brain. So this is a complicated slide. This is the clock. It's called your circadian clock. When you wake up in the morning, light hits it. It's like an alertness pill. And in darkness, that's the time for you to fall asleep, right? So one of the things that this alertness, this circadian clock also decides is whether you're a morning lark or a night owl. So what time you fall asleep and what time you wake up, right? So, how many here would like to fall asleep after, say, 1 o'clock in the morning? Raise your hands, right? Those are the night owls, right? And then there are other people who wake up spontaneously at 6 o'clock in the morning. Those are the morning larks, right? So when I'm working with a team, I have to take into consideration that when it's your optimal sleep, whether you're sleeping in accordance to your circadian clock, and because you have to sleep and maximize your performance and be able to sleep well, and yet you have to be a part of a big team, and a big team has a schedule that you have to kind of adapt to too. So that's part of optimizing sleep. Now, that clock in your brain is like a master clock, right? But in fact, every cell in your body and every physiological function has a circadian rhythm. And if this is not your normal clock, this is midnight, 6 in the morning, noon, and 6 p.m. So there's actually a time during the day where almost every function peaks. So when you're talking about optimal living, you really want to figure out exactly where your clock is, and then you want to design a life in which you are optimized, not just because of external things, but also biologically. And in fact, I got to tell you that sleep, and it's like I said, it plays an important function in performance the next day. But in fact, we now know that sleep has a really important impact on your health. So irregular and poor sleep contributes to problems with dementias, insulin resistance, diabetes, obesity, even maternal fetal health, cancer, as well as cardiovascular disease. And I know that, especially in this country, cardiovascular health and diabetes is really rampant. And if you think about the 3 main ways that people age and die, it's either heart disease or strokes, or it's dementias or cancer. And again, poor sleep and irregular sleep plays a starring role in them, right? So it's another reason why you want to pay attention to this. Okay, so if sleep is so absolutely essential, and sleep is absolutely essential, right? If sleep is so essential, why is it that people make such poor decisions? Why is it that people decide to shortchange their sleep? Why is it that people decide to be on light, or on their devices, play video games late into the evening? Well, the way that human beings have evolved, if you look at human evolution, and you plotted it over a 24-hour period, the invention of the light bulb happened in the last 80 seconds. So we are really not evolved to know how to handle artificial light. And light actually has an intrinsic relationship with the ancient part of our brain, right? We respond to light, and it actually changes our mood. So I was recently in Florida giving a talk, and this was the scene from outside my hotel. So if you look at this light, at this picture, it makes you look really happy, right? It looks like a nice picture. If you look at the second picture, if it becomes a little darker, perhaps your mood is not as bright. But then if you look at the same picture in the dark, your mood can change. It can actually look a little creepy, right? So this is just something that happens naturally. So the way we evolved, we kind of evolved to try to avoid dark at night. And in the ancient times, if you wanted to avoid dark, you'd sit around a bonfire. And a bonfire, which is the natural lighting, either moonlight or the bonfire, would not suppress your melatonin. But this is the bonfire that people have today. This is interactive and it keeps you up at night, right? People don't, and it, without you even realizing it, it actively suppresses parts of your sleep. So I have to tell you, there is enough research that says that being awake at night while you should be asleep is actually bad for you. Because if you're awake, your problem-solving abilities are significantly reduced, while your risk-taking abilities are significantly increased. So that's a bad combination that can happen. So, and of course, there's, I'm not even going to go into it. There is a lot of research that shows that the presence of artificial light at night is really bad for you. We know it's bad it causes mental health issues in adolescents. In fact, it's shown to have a poor effect on your cardiometabolic health. But enough of that. So there's plenty of that happens. So I want to switch gears here, and I want to tell you that when I use these principles, and I work with professional athletes, or I work with business leaders, I have to tell you, the first thing, my goal is that your relationship to sleep has to change. And I think that consists of 5 steps, right? The first thing is that you really have to start valuing sleep. This thing that I'm going to sleep when I'm dead, I've heard it many times. I'm going to tell you, I've got news for you. You're going to die earlier. Because if you don't sleep, there's enough data to show that actually increases all cause of mortality. Plus, I think it just shows poor judgment because you're not getting enough sleep. Right. The second thing is you do want to prioritize sleep. Just, the problem is, remember that circadian rhythm that I had talked about? So the way that the circadian rhythm works is that even your willpower it's much stronger at 10 a.m. versus 10 p.m. So when you, at 10 in the morning, when you decide that at 11 o'clock I'm going to go to bed, I'm going to put everything aside, and I am going to fall asleep, you're not going to be able to do that if you're depending only on your willpower. You are not. You really have to set up a system of some processes or systems that you can count on, so that you can allow sleep to happen. The third is you do want to personalize sleep, right? So if I'm talking to Sean Payton, the head coach, he may be going to bed, he may require 7.2 hours, and he may be going to bed at a certain time. His linebacker, who's 22 years old, may want to go to bed at 3 in the morning, right? And he still has to wake up at a certain time. So you want to take all this information and make sure that you put in the correct numbers so that you know exactly what to do for yourself. The fourth thing is trust your sleep. And perhaps this is a big lesson for all of us, right? You've been able to sleep for many, many years. An occasional night of poor sleep should not be a reason for you to make changes. So if you have an occasional night of poor sleep, or even a string of bad nights, you don't want to start doing things like going to bed earlier or taking naps, because what that does is it sets you up for worse sleep. And the fifth I have to tell you is to protect your sleep. So you should reserve your bedroom for sleep or sexual activity only. That's the only thing that you should be doing there. If you start doing things like watching television, taking in work, eating, and doing other sort of entertainment, then you're not going to associate your bedroom with just sleep and sexual activities. You're going to be doing all those other things in there. So you want to protect your bedroom. So when you think about healthy sleep, it's not just one thing, right? It's regularity. Are you sleeping at the same time? Whether you're satisfied, whether you're alert the next day. What the timing is, what efficiency is, whether you're sleeping efficiently. And actually, I have to tell you that for every, this is a tech conference, and I think AI is going to be where we probably will have solutions for people for sleep, right? There's every aspect of sleep, whether it is to figure out what your sleep duration is, or what your circadian clock is, what your mental health issues are, or the solutions, right? Whether we can measure your sleep and tell you exactly what those solutions are. All those can be AI driven, and probably that's the way to democratize it and bring it to large organizations. I want to give you just 4 takeaways also for yourselves. So the first thing is consistency, right? You want to try to go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time, maybe an hour difference here or there. I mean, I can ask the audience, in the week leading up to coming here for the conference, how many of you went to bed at the same time and woke up at the same time? Yeah, so maybe like 5% of the audience. So, you want to be able to do that better. You also want to have a good winding down schedule. When an aeroplane is landing, it doesn't just like stop and then plop to the ground. It kind of loses its altitude, slows down, makes all these maneuvers before it sleeps. You can't really keep working and then turn the computer down and say, I'm going to fall asleep. That's not how sleep happens. You really want to develop a good winding down schedule, maybe a hot shower or a hot bath. If you have praying or meditation practices, that's a good time to do this. Read a book. Do something that helps you relax so that sleep can happen. And I got to tell you that, if you were talking to me as a doctor, I would tell you, you do not want to drink caffeine too close to your bedtime. But again, remember, there's an individualization. So some people are fast metabolizers. Some people are tolerant to caffeine. So you want to figure out where you're at and then tailor that. The same goes to alcohol, which can actually disrupt your sleep, as well as smoking pot. And then, of course, light exposure. You want to make sure that you want to be exposed to nice bright light, which is not a problem in this country, but during the day. But then at night, you want darkness. And then I want to end by just like a call for action. If you think about life and you want to maximize fulfillment, you really have 3 variables, right? You have wealth, health, and time. So you want to choose how you spend your resources. How are you going to allocate the wealth that you've accumulated, right? If you wanted, and there is a season of life. If you wanted to go bungee jumping, you want to do it when you're younger. You don't want to wait till you're 85 to do it. But when it comes to your health, optimizing, using your wealth or optimizing your resources for health is important for every season of life. Because if health is 0, you've run out of time, right? There's not much to do then, right? And there are, in healthcare, there are these tremendous new things that are coming around the corner. People want to live longer. If you pay attention to your sleep, you'll give yourself a chance to be able to use that, okay? So I'm going to end with just this saying. A healthy man wants 1,000 things, but a sick man wants just one thing. So you want to pay attention to that. And then end with my philosophy. I'll tell you, because I work with a lot of leaders, a leader's life is always going to be unpredictable and chaotic. And actually bringing consistency into your sleep schedule really helps anchor the day. And I can tell you that my philosophy is that optimizing sleep comes from creating a system of continuous small improvements, right? And so the overall goal of great sleep is achieved by making good choices continuously and consistently, and getting back on track anytime you fall off. And with that, I think I'm going to end here. I know some of you are sleeping, so hopefully they'll be waking up when the light's up.
For more interesting content, like, comment, and subscribe to our NASSCOM YouTube channel.